I'm Samantha Rivers, 28 years old, and I never thought my academic achievement would trigger a family war. There I stood in my parents' living room, still wearing my graduation cap, as my nephew Trevor deliberately pushed my celebration cake to the floor. "Eat it off the ground," he sneered. "You think you're better than everyone." The room froze. My sister Jessica smirked. My parents looked away. Buttercream icing splattered across my new shoes, like the remains of my family relationships. That moment changed everything between us forever. Before I dive into this messy family drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever dealt with toxic family, and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Now, let's get into how one ruined cake exposed years of family dysfunction. To understand what happened that day, you need to understand my relationship with Jessica. My sister is 4 years older than me, turning 32 last March, but sometimes I feel like I'm the older sibling. Jessica was always the golden child in our family, beautiful, popular, the center of attention wherever she went. Our parents adored her, and she basked in their affection while I often stood in the shadows. Jessica's life took an unexpected turn when she got pregnant at 17. She dropped out of high school in her junior year to have Trevor. Our parents were disappointed but quickly rallied around her. They converted our basement into an apartment for her and the baby, paid for everything, and essentially became Trevor's second set of parents while Jessica figured out what to do next. I was only 13 when Trevor was born, still trying to navigate middle school drama while my family's attention completely shifted to Jessica and her baby. I didn't resent the baby. How could I? But I did notice how my academic achievements became footnotes in family conversations. When I made the honor roll, my parents would smile and nod before turning back to whatever crisis Jessica was facing that week. While Jessica struggled with motherhood, I threw myself into my studies. I worked part-time jobs through high school to save for college, knowing my parents had depleted most of their savings helping Jessica. I started at community college to save money, then transferred to a university. The whole time, I worked 30 hours a week at a coffee shop, coming home exhausted only to hit the books until midnight. Jessica's resentment began simmering as I progressed through college. She'd make cutting remarks about how some people have the luxury of pursuing education, or how not everyone can be Miss Perfect. Meanwhile, her marriage to Trevor's father, Rick, was falling apart. Rick had started using drugs, though I later learned this wasn't the whole story. When Trevor was 7, Rick moved out, and Jessica moved back in with our parents, occupying the same basement apartment where she'd started. Our parents immediately stepped in as surrogate parents to Trevor. They drove him to school, helped with homework, and attended his parent-teacher conferences when Jessica was working, or more often, out with friends. Jessica cycled through a series of retail and waitressing jobs, never holding one for more than a few months. She'd blame difficult managers or scheduling conflicts, but everyone knew the real issue was her unreliability. Despite the tension with Jessica, I tried to be a good aunt to Trevor. I'd take him to movies or help with science projects when I visited on weekends. Trevor was a bright kid with a quick wit, but I noticed troubling behaviors emerging around the time he turned 10. He'd become defiant with my parents, throw tantrums when he didn't get his way, and speak disrespectfully to adults. When I gently mentioned this to Jessica, she lashed out, accusing me of judging her parenting. "Not everyone can be as perfect as you, Samantha," she'd spit venomously. "Some of us have real problems in the real world." As Trevor entered adolescence, his behavior worsened. He began talking back to teachers, his grades slipped, and he started hanging out with older kids known for causing trouble. My parents, unwilling to upset the delicate balance with Jessica, made excuses for him. "He's just going through a phase," my mother would say. "All boys are difficult at this age." The pattern was clear. Trevor would misbehave, Jessica would minimize it, my parents would enable both of them, and I would be painted as judgmental if I expressed concern. This dynamic repeated for years, with the intensity increasing as Trevor became a teenager, and I continued advancing in my education. By the time I was completing my master's degree in education, working full-time as a teaching assistant, I'd mostly made peace with my family's dysfunction. I kept a healthy distance, visiting for holidays, but maintaining my own life with my boyfriend Ryan, who fully understood my family situation. My graduation represented more than an academic achievement. It symbolized my breaking free from the family patterns of enabling and excuse-making. The day before my graduation party, I overheard Jessica whispering to Trevor in the kitchen. They fell silent when I walked in, but the glances they exchanged sent a chill down my spine. Something was brewing, but I never imagined it would manifest as a destroyed cake and a devastating instruction to eat it off the ground. The room fell silent after Trevor's words hung in the air. My graduation cap felt suddenly heavy on my head as I stared at the destroyed cake. A beautiful, three-tiered creation, with "Congratulations, Master Samantha," written in elegant script, now splattered across my parents' hardwood floor. Jessica broke the silence with a laugh. "Oh my God, Trevor, you're such a goofball." She ruffled his hair like he'd just told a slightly off-color joke at dinner, not deliberately humiliated his aunt on one of the most important days of her life. My mother immediately reached for paper towels. "Accidents happen," she murmured, though everyone in the room knew this was no accident. My father awkwardly patted my shoulder before joining my mother in cleaning up the mess. I stood frozen, watching buttercream icing seep into the floorboards, tears welling in my eyes. Ryan, my boyfriend of 3 years, stepped between Trevor and me, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, looking from Trevor to Jessica. "Apologize right now." Trevor smirked and looked to his mother, who simply rolled her eyes. "Everyone's being so dramatic," Jessica said. "It's just cake. We can get another one." I finally found my voice. "This isn't about the cake, Jessica." My voice shook but grew stronger with each word. "This is about respect, which your son clearly hasn't learned." Before Jessica could respond, I turned and walked out the door, Ryan following close behind. In his car, I finally broke down, sobbing as he held me. "I don't understand," I kept saying. "What did I do to make them hate me so much?" That evening, my phone lit up with messages from my family, each one minimizing what had happened. My mother: "Please don't be upset, honey. Trevor's going through a difficult phase." My father: "Let's not make this bigger than it is." Jessica, predictably, was more direct. "Way to ruin a party by being oversensitive. Trevor was just joking around." After a sleepless night, I made a decision. I called Jessica directly, something I rarely did, preferring to communicate through our parents to avoid conflict. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday," I said when she answered. "Oh my God, are you still on about that?" "It was a stupid cake, Samantha." "It wasn't about the cake," I insisted. "Trevor deliberately humiliated me, and you laughed. I deserve an apology from both of you." Jessica's tone changed from dismissive to hostile. "An apology? For what?" "For not worshiping at the altar of your precious degree. For not pretending you're better than the rest of us just because you went to college." "Trevor was just saying what we all think. You're constantly showing off with your fancy degree and your perfect boyfriend and your perfect life." The conversation devolved from there, with Jessica revealing something that stunned me. She had actually encouraged Trevor's behavior. She'd been telling him for weeks that I thought I was too good for the family, that I looked down on them for their lack of education. None of it was true, but Trevor, seeking his mother's approval, had acted on her poisonous narrative. "You know what, Jessica? I'm done," I finally said. "Until you and Trevor can sincerely apologize and take responsibility for your actions, I don't want either of you in my life." I hung up and immediately blocked her number, then texted my parents to let them know I needed some space from Jessica and Trevor. Their response was predictable: pleased to keep the peace and be the bigger person for the sake of family harmony. "I've been the bigger person my entire life," I wrote back. "I'm done enabling bad behavior by pretending it's acceptable. I love you both, but I won't be around Jessica or Trevor until there's genuine accountability." Setting this boundary felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, I wasn't smoothing things over or accepting mistreatment for the sake of family peace. Ryan was supportive, telling me he was proud of me for standing up for myself. My closest friend Alicia, who'd heard stories about my family dynamics for years, sent a gift basket with a note saying, "Congratulations on your degree and your backbone." Still, doubt crept in during quiet moments. Was I overreacting? Was I throwing away family relationships over a ruined cake? But then I'd remember the look on Trevor's face. Not childish mischief, but calculated cruelty, and Jessica's satisfied smirk. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of resentment, enabled by my parents' unwillingness to address the real problems in our family. 2 weeks passed with no contact from Jessica, though my parents continued their campaign of family unity through daily calls and texts. I held firm, focusing on my new job as a high school English teacher and my life with Ryan. I was just beginning to feel like I could move forward when the retaliation began. 2 weeks after I cut contact, my phone exploded with messages from extended family members. My cousin Bridget called, confused about why I was saying such horrible things about Jessica and Trevor. My uncle Dave sent a lengthy text questioning my vendetta against my sister. Even my grandmother, who rarely used her cell phone, left a voicemail asking why I was spreading rumors about Jessica's parenting. Initially, I had no idea what they were talking about. Then my Aunt Diane forwarded me screenshots of text messages supposedly from me, describing Jessica as an unfit mother and Trevor as a future criminal. I was horrified. I had never said or written any such things. After some investigation, I discovered Jessica had accessed my Facebook account. I'd foolishly used our mother's birthday as my password, something Jessica easily guessed. She had sent private messages to family members pretending to be me, and posted a public status, which I quickly deleted, about how some people shouldn't be allowed to have children. I changed all my passwords and enabled two-factor authentication, but the damage was done. Half the family believed I was on some character assassination campaign against Jessica, despite my denials. That was just the beginning. 3 days later, while I was teaching a sophomore English class, the school secretary called me to the office. Jessica was in the main lobby, demanding to see me. By the time I arrived, the principal had asked her to leave, but she was still in the parking lot. "What are you doing at my workplace?" I asked, keeping my distance as she leaned against my car. "Just thought I'd introduce myself to your colleagues," she said with a smirk. "Let them know what kind of person they're really working with. You need to leave, Jessica. This is completely inappropriate." Inappropriate? Like turning our entire family against me? Like telling everyone I'm a terrible mother? Her voice rose with each accusation. "I never said those things. You know you sent those messages pretending to be me." "Prove it," she taunted. "Everyone already believes you're the jealous sister who can't stand that people actually love me despite not having a fancy degree." As I turned to walk away, I heard a loud scraping sound. Jessica had taken her keys and dragged them along the side of my car, leaving a deep gash in the paint. "Oops," she said with mock innocence. "Accidents happen." I was shaking with rage, but managed to pull out my phone and take pictures of the damage. "This isn't over, Jessica." That evening, with Ryan and Alicia's support, I filed a police report about the vandalism. I didn't want to press charges, but I needed the incident documented in case Jessica's behavior continued to escalate. The police report was like throwing gasoline on a fire. My parents called, more upset about the report than about Jessica damaging my property or showing up at my workplace. "How could you involve the police in a family matter?" My mother sobbed. "Do you have any idea how embarrassed we are?" "Jessica keyed my car, Mom. She's stalking me at work. This isn't a family matter, it's harassment." "She's your sister. She's going through a difficult time." "When is Jessica not going through a difficult time?" I shot back. "That's always the excuse, and I'm done accepting it." My father got on the phone next. "Samantha, you're tearing this family apart with your stubbornness. Just apologize to your sister so we can move past this." "Apologize? For what? Having my car vandalized?" Being humiliated at my own graduation party? No, Dad. I'm not apologizing, and the fact that you expect me to shows just how dysfunctional this family really is. I hung up and cried for hours afterward. Ryan held me, letting me sob until I had no tears left. Maybe they're right, I whispered. Maybe I'm being selfish, putting my feelings above family harmony. Samantha, listen to me, Ryan said firmly. What your family calls harmony is actually just enabling toxic behavior. You're not being selfish, you're being sane in an insane situation. His words resonated with something deep inside me. All my life, I'd been the one expected to compromise, to understand, to forgive, without receiving apologies. I'd been trained to believe that keeping the peace was more important than being treated with basic respect. That night, I wrote in my journal, I will no longer set myself on fire to keep others warm. It became a mantra in the difficult weeks that followed, as Jessica continued her campaign against me and my parents continued pressuring me to fix a situation I hadn't created. I doubled down on my boundaries, telling my parents I wouldn't attend any family event where Jessica was present until she acknowledged her behavior and made genuine amends. They were horrified by this ultimatum, but for the first time in my life, I didn't back down in the face of their disapproval. What I didn't realize then was that Jessica's retaliation was just beginning, and Trevor was about to become both a weapon against me and a casualty of his mother's vendetta. 3 months after the graduation disaster, I was slowly rebuilding my life. I'd settled into my teaching position, maintained limited contact with my parents, and completely avoided Jessica. Ryan and I had just signed a lease on a new apartment farther from my family's neighborhood, a decision that brought both relief and sadness. Then one evening, I received a series of disturbing text messages from a number I didn't recognize. You think so perfect. Nobody actually likes you. Watch back teach. The messages continued, becoming increasingly threatening. It didn't take detective work to figure out they were from Trevor. The writing style, the specific references to incidents only he would know about. I blocked the number, but the next day, messages came from a different one. Ryan suggested installing security cameras outside our apartment, which seemed extreme until we woke up one morning to find my potted plants destroyed and fake spray painted on our welcome mat. The security camera footage clearly showed Trevor, hood pulled up, vandalizing our property at 2 a.m. The following week, my neighbor Darlene called to tell me someone had been tampering with my car. Her security camera had captured Trevor keying a crude word into my passenger door, the second time my car had been vandalized in 3 months. With 2 clear instances of property damage on video, I felt I had no choice but to confront my parents. I drove to their house unannounced, footage loaded on my tablet. Samantha, what a surprise, my mother said nervously when she opened the door. My father sat stiffly in his recliner, clearly uncomfortable with my unexpected visit. I need to show you something, I said, playing the security footage. They watched in silence as their grandson clearly vandalized my property. This has to stop, I said when the video ended. Trevor needs help, and Jessica isn't getting it for him. My father sighed deeply. We know. He's been expelled from school. This was news to me. Expelled? When? Why? My mother wrung her hands. 3 weeks ago. He was bullying younger students, taking their money. The school had given him multiple warnings. And Jessica? She says it's the school's fault, that they've targeted Trevor because he's from a single-parent household. My father couldn't meet my eyes as he spoke, a sign he didn't believe this explanation himself. He needs therapy, Dad. Professional help. We've suggested that. Jessica refuses. She says there's nothing wrong with him that wouldn't be fixed if, he trailed off. If what? If you would stop poisoning the family against them, my mother finished quietly. The absurdity of this accusation, that I, who had barely spoken to Jessica or Trevor in months, was somehow responsible for his behavior, left me speechless. My parents looked defeated, aged beyond their years by the stress of the situation. Despite my better judgment, I decided to try talking to Trevor directly. I asked my parents when Jessica would be at work and Trevor home alone, then planned my visit accordingly. Trevor answered the door with a scowl that faltered briefly when he saw me. At 15, he was already taller than me, with Jessica's blue eyes and his father's strong jaw. "What do you want?" he asked, not inviting me in. "To talk, just for a few minutes." He shrugged and walked inside, leaving the door open. I followed him to the kitchen where he grabbed a soda from the refrigerator, not offering me one. "I've seen the texts, Trevor, and the videos of you vandalizing my property. So what? Going to call the cops on me too?" His defiance was textbook teenage bravado, but something in his eyes looked wounded. "I want to understand why. What did I ever do to make you hate me so much?" His laugh was bitter, too adult for his young face, like you don't know. "I genuinely don't. You ruined everything. Mom says we were all fine until you decided you were too good for us with your college degree and your perfect boyfriend. She says you told everyone she's a bad mother and tried to get me taken away." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. "Trevor, I never said those things. Your mother hacked my social media and sent messages pretending to be me." Doubt flickered across his face. "You're lying." "Why would I lie? Think about it. Have I ever said anything like that to you or around you?" He was silent, considering. "Your mom also told you I'm the reason she and your dad split up, didn't she?" I guessed, based on his earlier comment about me ruining everything. His silence was confirmation enough. "Trevor, I was in middle school when they divorced. How could I possibly have been responsible?" Confusion replaced hostility in his expression. "She said you told Dad about her seeing other guys, that you were jealous and wanted to break them up." The revelation stunned me. Not only was Jessica blaming me for her failed marriage, but she was admitting to her son that she'd been unfaithful, while making me the villain of the story. "None of that is true," I said gently. "Your parents' problems had nothing to do with me, and I've never tried to turn anyone against you or your mom." Our conversation continued, revealing layer upon layer of lies Jessica had told Trevor about me. She'd convinced him I was responsible for every disappointment and hardship in their lives. She'd nurtured his resentment, weaponized his loyalty, and in the process, damaged his sense of reality. As I left, Trevor seemed conflicted. I had no illusion that one conversation had fixed anything, but at least I'd planted seeds of doubt about his mother's narrative. What I didn't know was that my visit would trigger a crisis. Trevor confronted Jessica with what I'd told him, and her reaction was so extreme that it would set in motion events none of us could have anticipated. 6 months after the cake incident, my grandmother's 75th birthday brought the family together at her assisted living facility. I'd agreed to attend after my parents promised Jessica would arrive after I left, allowing us to celebrate separately and avoid confrontation. I was chatting with my grandmother when my Aunt Meredith, my mother's sister, asked me to help bring in some packages from her car. Once we were alone in the parking lot, she turned to me with unexpected intensity. "I need to talk to you about Jessica," she said, making no move toward her car. "There are things you should know." Meredith had always been the family truth-teller, often to my mother's dismay. While everyone else maintained pleasant fictions, Meredith called situations as she saw them. "Jessica's issues with you didn't start with Trevor or your degree," she began. "She's been jealous of you since you were a child." This wasn't entirely surprising. I'd sensed Jessica's resentment for years, though I'd never understood its depth or origin. "When you were 16, you applied for that scholarship program, remember? The one that would have sent you to Washington for a semester?" I nodded. The prestigious program had seemed like my ticket to opportunities beyond our small town, but my application had apparently been lost in the mail. I'd been devastated. "It wasn't lost," Meredith said grimly. Jessica intercepted it. "Your mother found the torn-up pieces in Jessica's room, but decided not to tell you to keep the piece." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That opportunity could have changed the trajectory of my education, opened doors I'd struggled for years to open on my own. "There's more," Meredith continued. "Jessica's troubles didn't start with Trevor's birth. She was in serious trouble as a teenager. shoplifting, joyriding in stolen cars. Your parents covered it all up, paid people off to drop charges. They thought they were protecting her, but they were just teaching her she could get away with anything. Inside, my grandmother's birthday celebration continued, oblivious to the bombshells being dropped in the parking lot. And Trevor's father? The drug problem that supposedly broke up their marriage? That started after Jessica cheated on him multiple times. The poor guy turned to drugs to cope with her betrayal. Your parents know all this, but they've rewritten history to make Jessica the victim. I leaned against a car for support. Why are you telling me this now? Because I watched them scapegoat you your entire life, and I can't stand it anymore. Your grandmother feels the same way. We've both tried to talk sense into your parents, but they're too deep in their enabling patterns. When we returned inside, I looked at my grandmother with new understanding. She took my hand and whispered, "Everything Meredith told you is true. I'm sorry we didn't speak up sooner." As the party wound down, I asked my parents to step outside with me. The time for tiptoeing around family secrets was over. "I know about the scholarship application," I said without preamble, "and Jessica's juvenile record, and what really happened between her and Rick." The color drained from my mother's face. My father looked away, suddenly fascinated by a nearby shrub. "Who told you these things?" my mother asked, though she clearly knew. "Does it matter? Is any of it untrue?" Their silence was answer enough. "All these years, you've let me believe I was the problem. That if I just tried harder, was more understanding, more forgiving, our family would be okay. But the real problem was that you never held Jessica accountable for anything." "We were trying to protect her," my father said weakly. "No. You were protecting yourselves from the difficult work of actual parenting. And in the process, you failed both your daughters." Tears streamed down my mother's face. For the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. "You're right," she whispered. "We failed you both in different ways." My father nodded, his own eyes wet. "We thought we were doing the right thing, but we've created a monster. And now Trevor is paying the price too." Just as this moment of clarity dawned, Jessica's voice cut through the air behind us. "What the hell is this? A little family meeting without me?" She'd arrived early, catching us in this vulnerable moment of truth. Her eyes narrowed as she took in our tearful faces. "What lies has she been telling you now?" she demanded. "They're not lies, Jessica," my father said, straightening his shoulders. "We're finally acknowledging the truth." What followed was the most honest and explosive confrontation our family had ever experienced. Jessica alternated between rage and tearful self-justification as years of deception were laid bare. She accused everyone of betrayal, reserved her most vicious attacks for me, and finally stormed off to her car. "Trevor, we're leaving!" she shouted. But Trevor, who had been standing in the doorway watching the entire scene unfold, didn't move. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm staying with Grandma." Jessica peeled out of the parking lot alone, leaving Trevor behind. In the stunned silence that followed, Trevor broke down, sobbing as he revealed even more about the extent of Jessica's manipulation. "She tells me different things about different people all the time," he choked out. "She says Dad abandoned us because he never loved me. She says Grandma and Grandpa only help us because they feel guilty. She says everyone's against us, and we can only trust each other." As my parents comforted Trevor, I stood apart, processing the revelations of the day. The family dynamics I'd struggled with my entire life suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. Jessica wasn't just a difficult sister. She was a master manipulator who had been poisoning our family relationships for decades, with our parents' unwitting help. What I didn't realize was that having her manipulation exposed would push Jessica over an edge from which she couldn't return without hitting bottom first. One week after my grandmother's birthday party, I was grading papers in my apartment when my phone rang. It was my father, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Samantha, I need you to stay calm. Someone broke into your old room at our house last night." My first thought was burglars. Was anything taken? "Not taken, destroyed." His voice cracked. All your childhood memorabilia, your yearbooks, the quilt your grandmother made you, they're all ruined. A cold certainty settled over me. It was Jessica, wasn't it? His silence confirmed it. We weren't home, he continued. We were staying overnight with your grandmother. Jessica still has a key. The violation stung, but it felt distant, almost expected. Jessica had been escalating for months. This was just the next logical step in her campaign against me. What I didn't expect was what she did next. There's something else, my father said. She went to your apartment too. My heart stopped. What? When? Yesterday, while you were at work. Ryan called us this morning. He didn't want to upset you while you were teaching. I immediately called Ryan, who answered on the first ring. I'm so sorry, he said. I was going to tell you tonight, with dinner and wine to cushion the blow. How bad is it? Your degree is gone. She took it from the frame and tore it to pieces. Same with all your graduation photos. She dumped bleach on your books, slashed the couch cushions. The destruction of my degree, that precious document I'd worked so hard for, hit me harder than anything else. It represented years of sacrifice, of working while studying, of pushing forward when it would have been easier to give up. I was still processing this when my phone beeped with another call. The hospital. Trevor had attempted suicide. The next hours passed in a blur. I met my parents at the hospital, where Trevor was under observation after swallowing a bottle of his grandfather's heart medication. He'd been found in time, his stomach pumped, but the psychological damage was profound. When I was finally allowed to see him, he looked small and broken in the hospital bed, nothing like the angry teenager who had thrown my cake to the floor 6 months earlier. I'm sorry, were his first words to me, tears streaming down his face, for everything. It's not your fault, I said, meaning it. You were manipulated. Over the next few hours, Trevor revealed the full extent of Jessica's emotional abuse. She'd told him that everyone in the family hated him, that he was a burden, that only she truly loved him. After the confrontation at my grandmother's birthday, she'd become increasingly unstable, drinking heavily and lashing out at Trevor for taking their side. The night before his suicide attempt, she'd told him he was just like his worthless father and that she should have gotten rid of him before he was born. As he spoke, child psychologists and social workers came and went, documenting his statements. Child Protective Services had been notified, standard procedure in cases of attempted suicide by minors where parental abuse is suspected. Jessica arrived at the hospital still reeking of alcohol, creating such a scene in the lobby that security had to remove her. She screamed about conspiracies against her, about her rights as a mother, about how we had stolen her son's loyalty. Later that evening, alone with my parents in the hospital cafeteria, I made the hardest decision of my life. I'll testify about Jessica's behavior if CPS pursues this, I said. Trevor can't go back to living with her. My parents looked simultaneously relieved and devastated. They had finally reached their breaking point too, the point where even they could no longer deny the danger Jessica posed to her son. We'll apply for temporary custody, my father said, taking my mother's hand. Until Jessica gets the help she needs. If she gets the help she needs, my mother corrected quietly, years of enabling giving way to clear-eyed realism. The question of where Trevor would live once released from psychiatric observation loomed large. My parents were in their 60s, not ideally equipped to manage a traumatized teenager. Jessica's apartment wasn't an option, and I, despite my education in adolescent development, felt woefully unprepared for such responsibility. Yet, watching Trevor sleep that night, sedated after his emotional revelations, I felt a fierce protectiveness I hadn't known I was capable of. This boy had been failed by so many adults in his life, including me. Perhaps especially me. I had recognized the dysfunction in our family but had chosen distance over intervention, self-preservation over active involvement. Could I find a middle ground now? A way to support Trevor without sacrificing my own well-being? The questions swirled as I drove home to my destroyed apartment, Ryan waiting with cleaning supplies and takeout food, ready to help rebuild what Jessica had tried to break. What I didn't yet understand was that the legal system was about to become the next battlefield in our family's civil war. The hospital kept Trevor for 72 hours of psychiatric observation before releasing him to my parents' temporary care, pending a formal custody hearing. Jessica, meanwhile, had been served with a temporary restraining order preventing her from contacting Trevor or coming within 500 feet of my parents' home. Her response was to hire Raymond Delgado, an aggressive family attorney known for his scorched earth approach to custody battles. 2 days after Trevor's release, my parents received notice of an emergency hearing where Jessica would contest the temporary custody arrangement. She's claiming parental alienation, my father explained over the phone. Says we've turned Trevor against her, that his suicide attempt was a bid for attention orchestrated by us, specifically by you, Samantha. The accusation was so outrageous it would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. I immediately agreed to testify at the hearing, despite my fear of facing Jessica in court. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, intimate enough that I could feel Jessica's glare burning into me as I took the stand. She sat beside her lawyer in a conservative dress I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back, looking every inch the concerned mother, a stark contrast to the screaming woman who'd been escorted from the hospital a week earlier. Delgado's questioning was brutal, designed to paint me as a jealous sister with a vendetta against Jessica. Miss Rivers, isn't it true that you've long resented your sister's close relationship with your parents? No, that's not true. You never complained about the financial support they provided to her and her son? I understood my parents' choices, even when I didn't agree with them. Let's be direct. You believe you're intellectually superior to your sister because of your education, don't you? Objection, my parents' attorney called. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said, but the insinuation hung in the air. Delgado continued his attack, twisting every statement I made. By the time I stepped down, I felt bruised and shaken. Ryan squeezed my hand as I returned to my seat, whispering, "You did great." He's desperate because the facts aren't on his side. Next came character witnesses, neighbors who testified about Jessica's erratic behavior, Trevor's teachers who documented his declining academic performance and troubling comments about his home life, and finally, most powerfully, Trevor's therapist. Dr. Abernathy, a specialist in adolescent psychology, spoke in measured tones about the patterns of emotional abuse evident in Trevor's case. Trevor exhibits clear signs of what we call parental manipulation syndrome, she explained. He was conditioned to view one part of his family as enemies, to distrust his own perceptions, and to believe his worth was tied exclusively to his loyalty to his mother. When asked about Trevor's suicide attempt, Dr. Abernathy was unequivocal. Trevor felt trapped between his growing awareness of his mother's manipulation and his deep-seated fear of abandonment. The attempt was a cry for help, not attention-seeking behavior. Jessica's composure cracked during this testimony. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, who struggled to control her. When it was Jessica's turn to testify, her carefully constructed facade of maternal concern collapsed entirely. "Everyone's lying," she shouted after just 10 minutes of questioning. "Samantha has always been jealous of me. She's turned my son against me. She's turned everyone against me." The judge called for order as Jessica continued her tirade. "Trevor is my son, not hers, not theirs, mine." The outburst sealed Jessica's fate. The judge granted temporary custody to my parents, with me listed as a secondary guardian. Jessica would have supervised visitation only after completing a psychiatric evaluation and beginning a court-mandated therapy program. As the judge announced her ruling, Jessica turned to me with such hatred in her eyes that I physically recoiled. "This isn't over," she hissed before being led away by her attorney. She made good on that promise by disappearing for the next 3 weeks. Her apartment was emptied, her phone disconnected. Just as we began to worry, she resurfaced with a new strategy: false allegations. The police arrived at my school one afternoon with a complaint filed by Jessica, claiming I had physically abused Trevor during his childhood. The allegations were completely fabricated. I had never lived with Trevor, never been his caregiver, and had witnesses to account for my whereabouts during the times she claimed the abuse occurred. The investigation was thorough but ultimately cleared me of any wrongdoing. Yet the damage to my reputation was done. Though the school administration supported me, whispers followed me through the hallways. Parents requested their children be moved to different classes. The stress became almost unbearable. Meanwhile, my parents and I worked with Trevor's therapist to provide the stability he desperately needed. At first, he was withdrawn and suspicious, expecting us to manipulate him as Jessica had. Gradually, as the therapy progressed, he began to trust again, first Dr. Abernathy, then my parents, and finally, tentatively, me. Our breakthrough came one evening when I was helping him with a science project. As we cataloged rock samples for his geology unit, he suddenly asked, "Why don't you hate me?" The question caught me off guard. Why would I hate you? Because of what I did, with the cake, and the texts, and your car. He couldn't meet my eyes. Trevor, you were manipulated into doing those things. You're not responsible for your mother's issues. But I should have known better. I should have seen through her lies. You were a child, still are a child, trying to please your mother. That's natural. The adults in your life should have protected you, not used you as a weapon. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, Dr. Abernathy says Mom has something called narcissistic personality disorder, that she can't really love people the way normal people do. The diagnosis made perfect sense, explaining Jessica's pattern of manipulation, her inability to empathize, her constant need for admiration, and her extreme reactions to perceived slights. That doesn't mean you have to stop loving her, I said carefully. It just means you need to understand that her behavior isn't about you. It's about her illness. Trevor nodded slowly. I still love her, but I don't want to live with her anymore. Is that okay? That's completely okay. The peace of that moment was shattered the next day when Jessica filed an emergency motion alleging my parents were medically neglecting Trevor. The accusation was based on their decision, supported by Trevor's psychiatrist, to try therapy before medication for his depression. Once again, we found ourselves in court. Once again, Jessica's claims were dismissed. But the pattern was clear. She would use any means, no matter how damaging or dishonest, to punish us for taking Trevor from her. The constant legal battles took their toll on all of us. My parents aged visibly under the stress. I began having panic attacks before court appearances. Ryan, supportive as ever, worried about the sustainability of this constant state of crisis. Maybe we should move, he suggested one night. Start fresh somewhere. Jessica can't find us. The idea was tempting but felt like surrender. More importantly, it felt like abandoning Trevor just as he was beginning to heal. I can't leave him, I said. Not now, Ryan nodded, understanding but concerned. I'm just worried about you, about us. This can't go on forever. He was right, of course. Something had to change. I just didn't know what, or how, until an unexpected development shifted the entire dynamic of our family conflict. 1 year after Trevor threw my graduation cake to the floor, I watched him nervously adjust his tie before his first debate team competition. The transformation from the angry, manipulated boy of a year ago to this thoughtful, articulate teenager was remarkable, though not without setbacks. Trevor's journey through therapy had been challenging. He struggled with trust issues, abandonment anxiety, and periodic depression. There were nights when he would wake screaming from nightmares about his mother, days when he would retreat into silence, and moments when his anger would flare unexpectedly. But there was progress, too. With consistent boundaries, therapy, and genuine affection, Trevor began to flourish. His grades improved. He made new friends who knew nothing of his troubled past. He discovered a passion for debate that channeled his natural intelligence and quick thinking in positive directions. Our relationship evolved from awkward distrust to genuine connection. I wasn't a replacement mother. Trevor had enough parental confusion without adding to it, but I became something between a mentor and an older friend, someone who understood both his history and his potential. The breakthrough moment came after his first debate victory. As the team celebrated around him, Trevor sought me out in the audience. "I wanted to say sorry," he said, hands jammed in his pockets. "For the cake. I know it's been a year, but I never really apologized properly." "You don't need to." "I do," he interrupted. "I was awful to you. Mom had been telling me for weeks that you thought I was stupid, that you made fun of me to your college friends, that you wanted to send me to military school. None of it was true, but I believed her because she was my mom." The simple honesty of his apology moved me deeply. "Thank you, Trevor. That means a lot." He hesitated, then added, "She said a lot of other stuff too. About how you thought she was a bad mother, how you were trying to replace her, how you were jealous because she had me and you didn't have kids." He shook his head. "Looking back, it's so obvious she was projecting her own feelings onto you." This insight, that Jessica had been attributing her own jealousy and insecurities to me, was profound coming from a 15-year-old. Trevor's therapist had helped him develop remarkable self-awareness and critical thinking skills. Meanwhile, Jessica's life had taken a dramatic turn. 3 months after losing custody of Trevor, she was arrested for driving under the influence. The judge, familiar with her from our custody hearings, mandated a rehabilitation program rather than jail time. Initially, Jessica approached rehab like everything else, as a system to manipulate for her benefit, but something unexpected happened during her 90-day program. Whether through the skilled intervention of the counselors or simply hitting rock bottom, Jessica began to genuinely engage with treatment. Her counselor contacted my parents, explaining that Jessica was doing serious work on herself and wanted to make amends. They were skeptical, we all were, but agreed to family therapy sessions with Jessica once she completed the rehab program. The first session was tense. Jessica sat rigidly across from my parents, Trevor, and me. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked different, thinner, more subdued, with none of the manic energy that had characterized her recent appearances. "I've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and alcohol use disorder," she began without preamble. "I've spent my whole life blaming everyone else for my problems, especially you, Samantha. It was easier than facing the truth about myself." The therapist guided us through a structured conversation, preventing the old patterns of accusation and defense from reasserting themselves. Jessica acknowledged specific harm she'd caused, from childhood sabotage to recent harassment, without making excuses or expecting immediate forgiveness. "I don't expect any of you to trust me," she said toward the end of the session. "I wouldn't trust me either. But I'm committed to treatment, to sobriety, and to becoming someone worthy of being in Trevor's life again, if he wants that someday." Trevor, who had been silent throughout the session, finally spoke. "I do want that. Someday. But not yet." Jessica nodded, accepting his boundary with grace. "I wouldn't have thought possible a year earlier." Over the following months, Jessica continued her therapy, maintained her sobriety, and respected the limits we set around contact and visitation. She found steady work as a receptionist at a dental office, secured her own apartment, and even began taking classes at the community college where I had started my own academic journey. Trevor's healing progressed in parallel. He still lived with my parents, but spent weekends with me and Ryan, gradually building a new concept of family based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and fear. We celebrated his 16th birthday with a proper cake that remained safely on the table throughout the party. The family therapy sessions continued, sometimes productive, sometimes painful, but always honest. My parents confronted their role in enabling Jessica's behavior and neglecting my needs. I acknowledged my own part in the family dysfunction, my tendency to withdraw rather than engage, my occasional self-righteousness, my reluctance to set boundaries until they were catastrophically breached. Trevor thrived with this new honesty. "It's weird," he told me during a weekend visit, "but I feel more secure now that everyone admits when they mess up. Before, there were all these things we pretended not to see or know, Now, everything's just out there. My professional life stabilized as the legal battles subsided. The school community, initially wary after Jessica's false allegations, rallied around me when the truth emerged. My students' test scores were among the highest in the district, and I was named Teacher of the Month in May. Ryan, who had stood by me through the entire ordeal, proposed on the anniversary of my graduation. I figured we should replace the memory of that day with something joyful, he said as he offered me a simple solitaire ring. I accepted without hesitation, grateful beyond words for his steadfast support. As spring turned to summer, our family cautiously planned our first shared celebration in over a year, a dinner to mark my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Jessica would attend, supervised but present. Trevor was nervous, but determined to navigate this new terrain of having his mother back in his life in a limited, structured way. The dinner wasn't perfect. Conversations sometimes stalled awkwardly. Old tensions occasionally surfaced. But there were genuine moments of connection, too. Jessica asking thoughtful questions about Trevor's debate team, my father telling stories from the early years of his marriage, my mother showing photos from family vacations long past. Most significantly, there was a new cake. This one to celebrate not just my parents' anniversary, but our collective journey toward healing. When Jessica volunteered to cut and serve it, the symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. She met my eyes as she handed me the first slice. "I know a cake doesn't fix anything," she said quietly. "But it's a start." It was indeed just a start, but a meaningful one. As I watched Trevor laugh at something my father said, I realized we were creating a new family narrative, one based on truth rather than denial, boundaries rather than enabling, and the possibility, however fragile, of redemption. 2 years after the cake-throwing incident that changed everything, I stood in my parents' backyard watching Jessica help Trevor adjust his tie before his senior prom. The sight would have been unimaginable 24 months earlier, yet here we were. Not perfect, not completely healed, but moving forward in ways I'd never thought possible. Jessica had maintained her sobriety for 18 months now. After completing her rehabilitation program, she'd committed to ongoing therapy, both individually and with Trevor. She'd earned her associate's degree from the community college and secured a job as an office manager for a small accounting firm, her longest continuous employment ever. "Not too tight," she was saying to Trevor, her hands gentle as she adjusted his collar. "You want to be able to breathe and dance." Trevor smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I doubt I'll do much dancing. Debate team members aren't exactly known for their smooth moves." "You never know," Jessica replied. "Your dad was a terrible dancer too, but he managed to charm me anyway." This casual, positive reference to Trevor's father was another sign of Jessica's growth. She'd stopped rewriting history to cast herself as the victim in every scenario. She'd even facilitated Trevor reconnecting with his father, who was now 5 years sober and working as a substance abuse counselor in Arizona. My parents watched from the patio, visibly moved by the scene. They'd aged during our family crisis, but the resolution had brought them new wisdom and peace. They'd confronted their own enabling patterns with the help of a therapist and rebuilt their relationship with all of us on healthier foundations. "Never thought we'd get here," my father murmured to me. "There were days I thought our family was broken beyond repair." "Me too," I admitted. "But I'm glad we didn't give up." Ryan joined us, camera in hand to document Trevor's milestone. We'd married 6 months earlier in a small ceremony attended by the entire family, including Jessica. She and I weren't best friends. Too much had happened for that level of closeness. But we'd reached a place of genuine respect and cautious affection. My professional life had flourished alongside these personal developments. I'd been promoted to head of the English department at my school and had started working on a doctorate in education on weekends. Ryan's software company had taken off, allowing us to buy our first home, a cozy 3-bedroom with a yard for the puppy Trevor had helped us select from the shelter. As Trevor posed for photos with his date, a sweet, studious girl from his debate team, Jessica approached me with an envelope in hand. "I wanted to give you this before things get busy," she said. Inside was a graduation announcement, her own. She'd been accepted into a 4-year university to complete her bachelor's degree in business administration. I won't throw a party, she said with a self-deprecating smile. Given our history with celebration cakes. We both laughed. The ability to joke about that painful day, a testament to how far we'd come. I'm proud of you, Jess, I said, meaning it completely. This couldn't have been an easy road. It wasn't, she acknowledged. But it was necessary. I was so jealous of you for so long. Your accomplishments, your relationship, the way you always seemed to know who you were and what you wanted. I convinced myself you had everything easy, that you looked down on me, that you were the reason for all my problems. She glanced over at Trevor, now laughing with his date and grandparents. I nearly destroyed him with that poison. I can never fully make that right, but I can make sure it stops with me. Jessica had broken the generational pattern of dysfunction that had shaped our family for decades. Her journey toward accountability had inspired my parents to face their own enabling behaviors. My rigid self-reliance had softened into something more balanced and connected. And Trevor, the inadvertent catalyst for all this change, had grown from a manipulated, angry boy into a thoughtful young man with bright prospects. Later that evening, after Trevor had left for the prom and Jessica had gone home, Ryan and I helped my parents clean up the yard. As I folded the tablecloth where we'd served cake, perfectly intact this time, my mother touched my shoulder. I've been thinking about what you said last year, she began, about how families often need a crisis to break destructive patterns. You were right. I wish we could have changed without all the pain, but sometimes the most important lessons come through the hardest experiences. The cake had to hit the floor, I said, borrowing the metaphor we'd begun using in family therapy. Exactly. We needed that moment of absolute clarity to see what we'd become. As Ryan and I drove home that night, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. From that humiliating moment when Trevor threw my graduation cake to the floor, through the escalating conflict, legal battles, and painful revelations, to this peaceful evening celebrating new beginnings, we had traversed emotional territory I never could have imagined. What are you thinking about? Ryan asked, reaching for my hand across the console. How sometimes the things that seem to break us actually break us open, I replied. If Trevor hadn't thrown that cake, if Jessica hadn't escalated things so dramatically, we might still be stuck in those toxic patterns, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Sometimes it takes a cake hitting the floor for a family to finally face the truth, Ryan said, echoing the phrase that had become our family's shorthand for necessary disruption. The journey hadn't been linear, and it wasn't complete. Jessica still had moments of jealousy, Trevor still carried emotional scars, my parents still occasionally slipped into old habits, and I still struggled with fully trusting the family's transformation. But we were moving forward with awareness and intention, replacing denial with honesty, manipulation with direct communication, and enabling with appropriate boundaries. The most profound lesson I'd learned was that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harm. It means refusing to let past wounds determine your future. Jessica hadn't earned my trust back through apologies alone, but through consistent, verifiable changes in her behavior. Our reconciliation wasn't based on pretending the past hadn't happened, but on acknowledging it fully and choosing a different path forward. As we pulled into our driveway, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. The family I was born into had nearly destroyed itself, but from those ashes, we'd built something new. Something imperfect but authentic, fragile but resilient. Sometimes a cake has to hit the floor. Sometimes things need to fall apart completely before they can be rebuilt. And sometimes the family you fight for becomes stronger than the family you were given. What about you? Has your family ever experienced a crisis that ultimately led to positive change? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you love? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might be struggling with family dysfunction. Remember, healing is possible, even from the most painful beginnings. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to face your own difficult truths when they arise.